When I put together my 2025 challenge list last December, there were 3 craft activities that were initially separate, but which came to be closely related. The first was to take a class in making glass beads. The second was to learn to make stained glass sun catchers, and the third was to make a mosaic framed mirror. In January, when I started to look for hobby classes, I visited the Canberra Glassworks, which is the largest facility in the Southern Hemisphere dedicated to studio glass and which offers a wide range of glass-related classes. Included in their workshops was a 3-hour bead-making class. While I was keen to enrol, I needed to know whether I'd be able to film myself, but the staff at the Glassworks were unable to say, and my email inquiry to management was never answered, so I didn't go ahead. I then saw an evening class advertised on Facebook for making a glass mosaic Turkish lamp, so I enrolled in that, but it wasn't going to be held for another 6 weeks, and I wanted something sooner. I then found a weekend class making a stained glass on mirror mosaic, which would give me both some experience in working with glass and practice in making a mosaic, so I enrolled in that. The stained glass on mirror mosaic class was run by the owner of Merlin Mosaica, which is a Canberra-based online retail store that sells glass and mosaic supplies and tools in Australia and globally. The 1.5-day workshop was held at a local community centre, and of the 3 people in the class, I was the only person who'd not worked with glass before. The class started with some information about safety when working with glass, then moved on to a description of how to use the various tools to score, cut, break and sand the edges of the pieces. We then set about designing our mosaics. Given that this was all totally new to me, I was keen to keep my designs simple, and given that straight lines were obviously going to be easier to cut than curved lines, I opted to make a simple geometric piece inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright. I started with great enthusiasm. It was fantastic to be working on a creative craft again and learning new skills. But an hour later, I fell into a hole of quiet despair. The glass was much more difficult to handle than the teacher had made it look in her demonstration. I started to dislike the limited range of colours that I had chosen, and my design seemed sadly boring. Finally, after searching through the tubs of glass pieces available to choose from, I found some red and gold pieces that lifted the whole design and made it more interesting, and I started to enjoy the process again. At the end of the day, when we put the mosaics that the 4 of us had made side by side, I was a little jealous of what the other 3 people had created, but I was nevertheless satisfied that I'd given myself a reasonable challenge and hadn't overwhelmed myself or not finished on time, and that I had learnt the basic skills of cutting and gluing glass. The full-day class was followed by a half-day where we were to grout our glass mosaics. I must admit to being naive enough to think that the grouting session would be quick and easy, but it turned out that there was a lot to learn about the different types and colours of grout, their advantages and disadvantages, and the importance of mixing the grout powder with exactly the right amount of water to achieve the correct consistency, not too dry and not too wet. In the end, I was really pleased with the mosaic that I had created, and I hung it on a wall in my courtyard. However, I knew that there was much more to learn, both in working with glass and with designing mosaic pieces, so a few weeks later I enrolled in a second class offered by Merlin Mosaica, making a glass mosaic garden stake, in which I not only furthered my glass handling skills, but was much more adventurous with design and colour. However, while the 3 glass hobby courses that I'd done had been both fun and educational, by the end of March I still hadn't made any glass beads, so I went back to some online research, which soon led me to the concept of making beads in a microwave kiln using fusible glass. So I ordered a kiln kit online and purchased 2 packets of fusible glass offcuts through Merlin Mosaica, one set in translucent glass and the other in opaque glass. Plus, I also purchased some professional glass handling tools from Merlin Mosaica and set myself up on the garage bench. To say I was nervous about melting glass at 900 degrees centigrade in a kitchen microwave is an understatement. I'm normally quite a brave person, but despite watching a series of YouTube videos on how to use microwave kilns, I procrastinated. My main concern was that I could accidentally cause an explosion in the microwave, and it took me until the last week of May to decide to carry the microwave out to the garage and work there. I cut up some glass into small pieces, firstly some of the thicker fusible glass that I'd bought from Merlin Mosaica, and then some of the very thin confetti glass that had come with the kiln package and which I decided to test first. While the instructions that came with the kiln stated to set the microwave to high and heat the kiln continuously for 6 to 8 minutes until the hole in the top of the kiln glowed orange, the firing time used by some of the YouTube experts was just a couple of minutes. I was so nervous that I only set the microwave for a minute, then another minute, then 2 minutes, then 2 minutes more. During this time, the kiln paper increasingly produced an acrid smell while it progressively scorched to darker shades of brown, and I was afraid that it would catch fire. Fortunately, a quick check on the internet told me that this was normal and that the paper would eventually turn white again. So I set the microwave for another 3 minutes, then another 3. Finally, at 14.5 minutes, I saw the top of the kiln glowing orange. When I opened the microwave, the inside of the kiln top was glowing bright red, the paper had turned white again, and the tiny glass pieces had fused into little blobs, although the yellow glass had turned slightly green. I left it all to cool down, elated that I'd finally overcome my nerves and crafted my first pieces of fused glass. An hour later, I set the thicker pieces of glass to heat for 5 minutes, but after only 4 minutes, the top of the kiln had already started to glow, and at only 6 minutes, the glass pieces were done. Obviously, the 2 types of glass had completely different melting points, with, illogically, the thinner glass taking 3 times as long to become molten as glass that was 3 times thicker. As my confidence grew, I started having fun experimenting with different combinations of types and colours of glass, but it turned out that there were more lessons to learn. The first was that if the pieces of glass weren't heated long enough, the 2 layers would fuse, but the top layer would sit proud of the bottom layer, and I found that I had to go carefully for the last minute or 2 so that the top layer melted fully into the bottom layer, if that's what I wanted. But then I encountered a bigger problem. The finished pieces started spontaneously snapping, sometimes with such force that I heard the crack and found the 2 pieces quite a way apart. Given that it was early winter and I was working in an unheated garage, I figured that in my haste to reuse the kiln after a firing, I was cooling the glass down way too fast. So with my 10th firing, I left the hot kiln in the microwave with the door slightly ajar and left the whole lot to cool slowly for a few hours. And with this method, I finally reached the point where I had produced 2 almost identical fused glass pieces made with beautiful dichroic glass on top that were worthy of turning into a pair of earrings. However, as beautiful as my new earrings were, they still weren't beads in the sense that I could make a necklace or bracelet out of them. I'd seen videos of stringable beads being made in a microwave kiln, but my sole attempt ended in a near disaster. So I searched further and was reminded of a local professional glass artist, Carol Griffiths, so I enrolled in a one-off 3-hour bead-making class with her. Carol owns a fabulous studio in the light industrial estate of Fyshwick, where she teaches and sells some of her stunning glass creations. All of Carol's glass comes from Italy, and she has the largest palette of Italian glass colour rods in Canberra, as well as an extensive collection of glassworking tools. Carol's bead-making classes are based on what's known as lamp work, where a flame is used to melt rods of glass, with the molten balls of glass fed onto a fine metal rod called a mandrel, which is coated in a special bead release compound. The molten bead is then placed in a kiln to cool gradually and harden over 24 hours. I was given an apron to wear and a pair of special didymium protective glasses which help reduce the glare of the sodium flare from the gas flame. The gas used to fire the minor torches is a mixture of pure oxygen and liquid petroleum gas. Carol first gave me a demonstration of how to melt the glass and form it into a bead. Then it was my turn. I was excited to be finally making my own glass beads, but the work took intense concentration. I kept worrying that a blob of molten glass would fall off the end of the rod, although the bench top was metal, so it wouldn't have mattered that much. I made about 10 beads before I finally felt that I was getting the hang of it. After a morning tea break, Carol then showed me how to make waterfall glass beads, where drops from a second glass rod of a different colour are fused to the first ball of glass and rotated so that the two colours merged in striated lines. By the end of 3 hours, I'd made about 20 beads, which was enough to make a necklace. However, they were all different sizes and colours, which really didn't go well together. But I had achieved my goal finally and was very happy with that. The one-day stained glass on mirror mosaic workshop with Merlin Mosaica cost $180, and the 3-hour morning lampwork session with Carol Griffith cost $130. I also spent $254.45 on professional tools and sanding pads and $134 on 2 mixed glass boxes of fusible glass from Merlin Mosaica. The microwave kiln kit cost $125.85. I purchased some extra microwave kiln paper from home-based business Glass Fusing in Oxley, Canberra for $10. To make my earrings, I purchased jewellery supplies from Bead Barn for a total of $134.84 and from Spotlight for a total of $63.50. In my next episode, I take the intercity train from Canberra to Sydney to decide whether it is a better option than driving my car. Plus I go to the controversial Archibald Art Prize exhibition at the New South Wales Gallery. For more information about living your own unlived life, if you go to my website, you can download a copy of my free book, Living Your Unlived Life, Finding Contentment by Honouring Your Dreams. And if it's your thing, you could like this video and subscribe to my channel.